Yeah, good to meet you too, man. Was very impressed by your Notion doc.
Thanks. I'm glad you read it. A lot of folks kind of skimmed through, so it's great to see that you kind of went in detail. Wait, so you wanted to record this, right? Was that?
Yeah, you know, literally it's just like a just in case. I think it could
Yeah.
be interesting to either share if you want to, if you don't mind sharing. Or we can always cut stuff out if you're not comfortable with it. Or you could just keep it to yourself and then look back in like 4 years or something and
Yeah.
think about how things have changed. It's always nice to record stuff.
Yeah, I'm down. When you say share, do you have like a social media thing that you want to share it
Yeah,
to, or?
uh I have a YouTube and I have a personal podcast where I record conversations that are interesting with people.
Yeah, honestly, I'm down. Like, I'll tell you, I've done this pitch like 100 times now, so I've gotten pretty good at it. So I'm pretty comfortable being recorded. Let me
Yeah.
ask this: what's your setup? I sometimes record meetings. I use Grain, but I think that's more for like, I don't know, getting transcripts to share with the team and stuff like that. I don't know. What do you usually use?
For recording.
Yeah.
I've we got Zoom that's gonna kick out two audio sources. Then I might edit in Audacity for
Mhm.
like echo or like noise or whatever, and then Descript for cutting out ums and ahs and word gaps and stuff like that. Sometimes if a conversation needs a lot of rearranging, I might have to like. So I edited this one episode where there were two guys talking about a concept: tofu, mofu, and bofu, top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel, and
Mhm.
they neglected to define it until the end of the episode. They spent the entire episode talking about it, and
That's
I had to
funny.
go cut the thing and then put it on top, and then yeah,
Okay, okay, I got it. I got it. Sounds like you have a much more professional setup than I do. So
I
yeah,
mean,
whatever works for you.
it, it's amateur, but with a little effort put in, I think people can get a long way uh, towards instead of just dumping raw audio, which most people seem to do.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. So I read through your thing, which is kind of why it seems like you've practiced this for a bit. You have a really interesting background. I've always wanted to visit Azerbaijan. Like I was like, when I saw Baku, I was like, I recognize that
Uh,
from when I was memorizing
yeah,
it.
just some background. I'm ethnically Armenian, and there is huge ethnic tension between Armenia and Azerbaijan. You can think of my
Arm-
family more as
Armenian.
refugees. Yeah, we're like Armenian refugees from Azerbaijan. We actually can't visit Azerbaijan. Like if a person with an Armenian name tries to visit Azerbaijan, they won't let you in. My parents have not been able to visit their home since they were kicked out. So yeah, it's a weird background, but yeah, just
Yeah,
just
I didn't know.
figured
I
I'd
didn't
share
know.
that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Lots of history.
Yeah.
Um, I, the obviously the most famous Armenian I know is Sona Mosesian on the Conan show.
Who is
And
that? I actually don't know who that is. Oh wait.
wow, okay, yeah, she's
Oh,
like the most
she's
famous
like
Armenian.
product. Okay, she's like his production assistant or something. Or what's
His
their
he's
production?
just straight up assistant. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
But I think now she's a little bit more than assistant. She's like a
Yeah.
collaborator. He turns his staff into celebrities, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I've only seen like some like secondhand Conan material kind of floating
Yeah.
around. I don't watch it.
Well, they visited Armenia and they learned a bit about the history and the genocide there and all that. So
Hmm.
uh, it's heavy stuff. I didn't obviously pay super close attention to the full history, but I know that there's some heavy stuff going on. Okay, and then you join Facebook super early. It's just like a really inspiring story, man, and that's pretty cool. I'm unclear on. You said you worked on Comm for 4 years. I'm unclear on like when that transition happens,
Yeah.
why it happens. Because it takes a certain awakening to quit Fang and start working on something so fringe. I think it's fringe. I don't know. I don't know
It's
what you
pretty
think.
fringe, sure. Yeah, yeah. So a couple of things. First, when I say I've been working on Comm for 4 years, I actually only got the idea for this like whole end-to-end encryption platform like about a year ago. So when I say I've been working on it for 4 years, what I mean is, well, the code base I'm working with has been around for 4 years, and I've been pretty actively working on it. But before it was Comm, it was something called Squad Cow, which is basically this app I built for my friend group. It's sort of like a Slack for a friend group with an integrated calendar. And specifically, kind of the lodestar was my Burning Man camp. We're like 200 people, and we have this problem. We've tried like Slack, we've tried Discord. We have this problem where we're simultaneously very spammy. We like kind of to shoot the shit, have fun, but we also have all these deadlines and like all this project collaboration that needs to happen. And on these platforms, it's often very difficult to kind of separate signal from noise. It feels like they're built to be, just spam out everything you're thinking, and there aren't a lot of tools there to say, I want to follow this, or I want to make sure I get the updates here, but maybe I'll only check this channel when I'm on the toilet or something. And they're getting better, they're rolling out features, but I still feel like it's kind of like a second kind of priority. It's not something that's really at the forefront. So that's a large part of why I built SquadCal. The other kind of side of it is I kind of used it for my own friend group here in New York. And yeah, I've been working on it for a while, but kind of off and on, honestly. And only about like a year ago, and when I started working on the end-to-end encryption layer, which I always kind of wanted to do, it's something I kind of, the pandemic happened, I was stuck at home. I was like, what am I going to do? And I decided to kind of work on that end-to-end encryption layer. It was only then when I really got the idea for Comm. And since then also, we're really kind of pivoting a lot of the apps. So there's kind of been a calendaring focus, and now it's sort of being put to the side and being framed as kind of the first app. There's actually meant to be like, any number of apps that you can install to your community. You had the other question you kind of asked, like what made me leave Facebook? So I guess it's probably best to start kind of with the story of how I joined Facebook. I guess I was like a wide-eyed college student. Background is I've always loved kind of social, and my programming, has always kind of been from that angle. My whole family is actually programmers, like my mom, my dad, my uncle, my cousin, my sister, everyone. It's kind of crazy. And I learned how to program pretty young, but I found most of it kind of boring. Like my parents gave me K&R when I was 12, and I just kind of read through it, wrote some like calculator command prompt apps, and I was like, this is not fun. And honestly, I really only got into it when I discovered PHP and forums. That's what really, really got me excited. And this is like circa like 2003, 2004. And all my early programming was like modding forums. So I had this like forum where I had all my friends come online. We like hung out there. I like skinned it and then started adding kind of these like different mods. I actually, at the time, there's this model of like posting for hosting, which, you probably don't remember unless you were spending a lot of time back then. But basically the idea is you go on a forum, you post a bunch, they'll give you free hosting for your own website, right? And so we started doing that, and we offered like a lot of features and got pretty popular pretty quickly. For a while, if you Googled free hosting, the first site was this directory, and we were listed as #1 on that directory. So we were like the largest free host for a long time. This is a lot of my kind of college years, actually more high school and then early college was like also building out and automating that kind of hosting service. And we scaled it to intense amount. Like, so we scaled to the point where, so we used this control panel, cPanel. We had more accounts on our server than they did when they did load testing. Like they had like internal load testing they did. We had all this like customization we did to make that happen. So anyways, long story short, I was really into social, always have been into social. When Facebook came out for high schoolers, got really into it. I started, posting everything on Facebook, and which is, I guess, kind of common back then. And I wrote several browser extensions for Facebook, and one of them added a search box to your profile. And that one got pretty popular, right? And I personally used it because Facebook, and I always wanted to like have a conversation with somebody like, wait, like I want to share this article with you, and I would forget who wrote it or what, where it was from. And so I would want to search my own profile. And I used to just click see more posts manually until I found it. So that's what my browser extension did. I wrote in like a weekend, and it would just like click see more posts for you or whatever. Yeah. So anyways, that got me kind of noticed by Facebook, and I didn't notice. I like applied through like the college program, and then I'd mentioned this to the recruiter, and she said it was cool. Anyways, so I got an internship there sophomore year. This is 2011. So to give you some background, Facebook at the time was like 1 2-story building. There was technically 2 buildings, but like most of engineering was in product and design was in this one building, right? Yeah. And it felt crazy. Like it felt like, I mean, Facebook was already huge at the time, right? And it felt like, there's no politics. Like everyone was like working together. Everyone kind of knew each other. Felt like a pretty magical place. And on my second day, there was a hackathon. And so this hackathon, I'm like, okay, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the search thing that I built, and I'm going to make it happen for real. So I got a little team together. We got nowhere on that first day. Like, it turns out it's way harder to build a search index than it is to click this, make this like browser extension that clicks see more posts. But I kept on working on it every day. Like after work, I like kind of worked on it a bit more and like made a little bit more progress. And probably what made me fall in love with the company was halfway through my internship, my manager just told me to forget about my assigned intern project and I could just work on my hackathon thing. So yeah, as like a kid, that was so amazing, right? So I never left Facebook. I like kept working there. I worked on that project alone for a year. So I was solo on this project building the search index for a year. And after a while, it actually became a major strategic priority for the company. There was this goal to create like a whole like search index for posts. And it was amazing. We built at the time the largest index in the world. That's on authority of the Google engineers we poached. So it was like the entire search team was working on this. Like I was a very small part. Like there's these like genius C++ people. Like my mentor like read the entire C++11 spec to give you an idea. A single replica of our index was 25 racks in a data center, and each of them was outfitted with these like Fusion IO cards, which were at the time like the thing. There's like some sort of in between like RAM and hard drive, or it's like it was sort of like a precursor to flash drives, I guess. It was a kind of flash drive. But we bought out all of the flash cards. There were some Taiwanese company. We bought all of them. It was so expensive. Anyways, so this is a background. After that, I worked at kept working at Facebook. I wanted to try something new, so I moved to New York, started a new team called Public Conversations. At the time, every time Mark posted on Facebook, he just got spammy comments. So he kind of wanted to make this better, and I always had this passion for discourse. So I wanted to kind of improve the quality of discourse on Facebook. So that was kind of our team motto. We were improving the quality of discourse on Facebook initially from like the comment ranking stack, which we built out. Initially was just like ripped off from Reddit. We built out all of this like natural language processing, deep learning stuff that I honestly don't have full understanding of. But that team was amazing. It was great to, I was engineering manager, also sort of vaguely the PM because we never managed to staff a PM. But so what made me leave Facebook? I'll tell you, it was a confluence of things, and it at the time, like it was a very difficult decision, but it also felt like a very clear decision. And what I mean by that is basically, so we had this team going, this public conversations team that I loved. And after several reorgs, we were in an org called media, and Mark got really excited about live video in 2016. And so he did this company-wide lockdown, and then he rotated our entire org to work on live video. So my perspective, I have no issues with live video. Like it's like, sure, it makes sense as a company priority, but like, it's not my passion, So there was that. There's also, this happened at the same time as my 4-year vest, right? And so all these factors are kind of pointing to like, like this is probably the time to leave.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had like a pretty, my final meeting with my director, I was like tearing up and stuff. It was pretty intense. In retrospect, probably more intense than it needed to be, but
it's just a business decision. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
No, but like, they were a big part of your growth, right? From college. Like you didn't have to finish college and then you worked at one of the fastest growing companies on earth. Like it's a big part of your identity that you're leaving behind.
Absolutely. I felt, like it's hard to overstate. Like Facebook to me wasn't really a company. It was like the only company I'd ever worked at. It was like, to some extent, like it's exaggerating, but there was an aspect of being like sort of a family, in the sense that like I had like done this internship with all these interns in 2011, and we all felt pretty connected, and we had saved the company, and it like, I don't know. I don't think it was good that it felt this way to me, but that's how it felt. Let's put it that way.
I love a few of the tidbits here. Like, first of all, working on the thing that you think should exist, and then eventually the company comes around and recognizes it. I think that's a very common thing I see in smart people, that like you should just ignore what people tell you is a priority and think for yourself. And obviously you should do your job, but then also you have to have some leadership there, and people eventually recognize it. And then the second thing is the way that Mark tends to lock down the company at critical stages. Like I'm sure you were there for the mobile pivot as well.
That was huge. People forget it now, but there was a time when Facebook wasn't. Yeah, there was a time when Facebook wasn't guaranteed. Like there's a time when after Facebook IPO'd, the stock went down. Like everyone was saying Facebook's not going to make it, which in retrospect, like nobody could see that being a concern now. But
yeah. Well, anyway, it's pretty cool, and it's cool to hear another story about that. But okay, let's bring it a little bit closer to time. Then you left. Did you have a clear idea what you were going to do?
No. Well, so background about me is I had held a job since I was 14. So I had held multiple jobs, like grocery store bagger, like a teaching assistant at Kumon, like all this like like internships and like, so I just been working forever. So I wanted to basically try like spend some time not working. So I did the kind of post Facebook, like did some traveling, you know, did some like other cool projects. I worked on this really cool actually Burning Man project where we built this like 16-foot tall dome that had 7,500 LEDs that animated with the music. So that was a really cool problem, just like between like the processing audio and the like LED stuff. It was really fun. I worked with a close friend of mine who was like a hardware expert. So he was able to build all the hardware and I was able to do all like the software. That was like a multi-year project. But yeah, also worked on SquadCal, that app I talked about. And yeah, just like
cool.
a lot of open source stuff.
And then I guess, so you're pivoting constantly. You started with more of like a collaboration thing, then it was more of a calendar thing, and now it's more focused on chat. What is it based on? What is this, like a product instinct that you're having, or is there a community that you're closely connected to that's giving you all this feedback? Is it just friends?
Yeah,
like,
well, so I wouldn't say I'm pivoting constantly. I mean, honestly, the app was sort of a passion project and wasn't really like a startup. Where with a startup, you know, you're trying to find something that hits and you're trying to like pivot until you find it. I kind of started this thing with this kind of focus on like calendaring and focus on collaboration, just things that we needed as a camp. And in terms of the pivot to Comm, that all happened a year ago. So that all happened with like a year ago, I started working on end-to-end encryption. I realized I can't build the end-to-end encryption layer. It literally is impossible. I would have to like roll back a bunch of my features. And then I start thinking and realize, okay, actually it's impossible to build most apps with end-to-end encryption. You can only build these like simple chat apps, which is great. And like, I'm a huge fan of Signal, but like, that's all we can do today, right? And so from there, I kind of realized, okay, you know what? In the future, the only way we're going to get to privacy by default, the only way we're going to get to end-to-end encryption being something that scales is if people have their own servers, right? And so once I had that realization, I kind of worked backwards of like, okay, what's the most likely thing that's going to hit, that's going to get an install base of Keyservers going? Because I think whoever builds this first install base of Keyservers is going to be really well positioned to kind of capture this market. And that's kind of what led me to pivoting the app.
Can I need to, because I don't think I understand this very well. So
yeah,
you can do end-to-end encryption for chat. I don't understand what the material difference is between chat and every other kind of app, because totally. It's just a transport layer. Like what?
Yeah, well, that's actually what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's just a transport layer, and that's the limitation, right? So the average app you see out there, let's take Slack as an example. Slack is built with a client server model, right? And this is how apps have been built since the dawn of time, since back in 2004 when I was writing PHP apps. Actually, it was mostly server back then, but like, you know, there's always been a server layer, right? And what does the server layer do, right? Well, classic stuff includes like executing search queries, like ranking, right? It does a lot of stuff, right? Fundamentally, usually with a client server model, you have the thin client, the kind of client that, you know, when it starts up, connects to the server, asks the server, what do I need to display? The server tells it everything. And the client just like only keeps around what it needs in the cache. And next time it connects, it gets that same background. An end-to-end encrypted chat app is nothing like this, right? An end-to-end encrypted chat app takes all that server stuff, puts it onto the client, and then the server is just a message broker. And all the server does is, you know, you say, I want to send a message to user X. It receives that message, queues it up, and then when user X next connects, it flushes that queue. That's all that's going on, right? And the reason for that fundamentally is because end-to-end encryption is about being able to guarantee to the user that the app developer doesn't have access to their data. And not just the app developer, also governments, also service providers, but really it's about the app developer, right? And with a server layer like Slack has, like Facebook has, like Dropbox has, obviously the app developer has access to your data, right? And you know, the only thing you can really do with end-to-end encryption is you can put ciphertext up there. But all the typical stuff that a server needs to do, with the exception of maybe backup, most of it requires actually having access to that plain text. And that's why apps like Signal, apps like WhatsApp have basically no server layer, right?
Okay, so does that also mean that, I mean, let's say there's an existing history or database of documents and stuff. Like when I first connect, I have to download the full thing. Is this like
what do you mean? Sorry, is this for like an app like Signal?
So, no, maybe an app like Signal, but I'm just talking generic. Like, how do you deal with data, right? Because you're just saying like the server is just a queue now, meaning that like, you know, one I don't know how to, like, to me this is obvious. Like if in the client server model, the server keeps all the state, right? So Now when the server is just a queue, there's no state on the server essentially. I
There's
mean,
no
there's a
state.
little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah.
There's a little bit
Yeah,
of state with like
yeah,
tracking who's synced what, but that big, like if I were to build Notion
yeah,
end-to-end encrypted,
yeah.
where does the database go?
Great question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so there's several kind of points to talk about here. So with something like Signal or WhatsApp that uses the double ratchet protocol, which is the protocol that Signal introduced that preserves a principle called forward secrecy, it gets much more difficult to kind of back up encrypted data. Now I'll go into that in a second. But as a default, if you build something like, for instance, Keybase took this approach of giving up on forward secrecy and using a single symmetric key for an entire chat room. If you take that approach, you actually can back up data. You can back up ciphertext, right? Because Signal and WhatsApp don't take that approach, their server has no backup. And that's crucial to understand. If you've ever tried backing up your WhatsApp data, the way it works is you go through a menu tree, and then you pick iCloud, or it's depending on if you're iOS or Android, it's iCloud or Google Drive. It kind of keeps, you have to keep the app open while it like serializes, encrypts everything. Actually, it doesn't, it's plain text, so there's no encryption. But it takes it and then uploads it, and you keep the app open while that's happening. And now you've backed up your data as of that day. If you have some more messages the next day and then you lose your phone, those messages are gone. If you don't want to spend all this time with the app open waiting for it to upload, then there's no backup. Like, I don't know. I don't have the numbers. My guess is most users do not back up their WhatsApp. As for Signal, no backup. That's just not how they do it. So, and you've probably had this experience. I don't know if you've ever gotten a new phone and you see your Signal chats are missing.
Oh yeah. I have two phones, and when I switch SIM cards just for international travel and stuff like that, I can see that the WhatsApp doesn't transfer over. So yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. I never really questioned why. I thought it was just a poor UX decision, but now I see it's just a necessary part of the end-to-end encryption. So like, is this a fundamental thing? Is this something you're trying to solve, or you're just saying like this is?
So the backup thing isn't like super fundamental. So okay, so it might be worth talking about some alternative approaches, right? So
Yeah.
so the two that might be worth talking about are Matrix. Are you familiar with Matrix?
Not really. I was gonna ask about it because it's the other big end-to-end chat thing.
Yeah, Matrix is super cool. They have, in a lot of ways, kind of similar model to what we're doing. They have this idea of like you have a home server, and that your home server tracks your data, and they're a little bit more focused on kind of interoperability and allowing kind of different any different client that you want to use can use the same kind of Matrix protocol. But crucially, the big difference is, for end-to-end encryption on the Matrix platform, it's still client-based, right? So your home server doesn't have access to your plain text. That makes sense because the way they set up home servers, you find a home server provider on the internet somewhere. It's like some service provider, right? So you don't want to just give access to your data to that provider, right? But Matrix has a protocol, an end-to-end encryption protocol that actually is pretty similar to Double Ratchet for licensing reasons, because they didn't want to use the GPL license. They built their own and then BSD licensed it. I think it's called Megolm, but it's pretty much ripped off from Double Ratchet. So very similar with forward secrecy. So the way forward secrecy works, and the way Double Ratchet works, is every single message that you send has a different encryption key. And that's important to understand, right? So you might think you have just like one encryption key. If you and I are having a chat, right, we're just encrypting each message with that same key, or maybe we each have our own and we encrypt it with that key. That's not what's going on. Actually, each message has its own key, and the ratchet part of Double Ratchet is every time you send a message, that key gets ratcheted and a new key is created, right? And why it's called Double Ratchet is because every time, so let's say I send you 4 messages, then you send a message back, there's a new Diffie-Hellman that occurs. Are you familiar with Diffie-Hellman?
No.
Okay. Okay. Backtrack a little bit. So Diffie-Hellman is a definitive cryptographic protocol. It was pioneered maybe like the 70s or 80s. And basically what it does is you can imagine 2 people in a crowded like bazaar. Let's say you're somewhere in like, I don't know, Istanbul, and there's like 1,000 people around you. You can yell at each other. Like what person A yells a secret in the air. It's not a secret, just like something. They yell something. Person B yells something in the air. And from that point on, these 2 individuals can communicate in public, encrypted, completely secret, in a way that no one else can understand what they're talking about. And they went into this without any prior secrets either. So they met in the spot, they yelled these things out, and now they have a secret way of communicating. So Diffie-Hellman is how like TLS works. Like when we go to HTTPS websites, like it's a backbone of everything, right? So when you have end-to-end encryption, Diffie-Hellman allows you two random individuals to be able to create this like encrypted channel with each other. So with double ratchet, a new Diffie-Hellman occurs every single time some like the conversation is switched. Like every time I start talking, a new Diffie-Hellman occurs. And every time you start talking, a new Diffie-Hellman occurs. That's the first ratchet. The second ratchet is every time you send a message, there's a deterministic ratchet, one that both sides can like predict, like to say, okay, this message now gets ratcheted into this key, into this key, into this key. Okay, so all this background is to point out that in order to be able, so the default way you would imagine a backup would occur, and the default way a backup occurs for an app like Messenger is I send you a message, before Facebook Messenger even sends it to you, it backs it up, right? It takes that message and it stores it in its database, right? It's a really easy, transparent, automatic way of backing up. You don't have to manually back anything up. You don't lose your data since the last backup. It's great, right? The issue is because every single one of these messages has a different key, and because obviously those keys aren't being exposed to that server now, the server can back up the ciphertext, but that ciphertext is useless without the keys. And so to really back everything up, you need the clients now to take this giant bundle of keys that they've created to encrypt all of that and to back it up. And that's what Matrix does. And Matrix has this, you can go on their GitHub, there's an issue there. And this is a long-standing issue. If you log into a web browser for the first time, it freezes the web browser for like 10 minutes. Because what's happening is it's downloading all of these keys onto your client so that now you can actually get the backup and actually scroll up in your chat history. Right. So that's one approach, and it has its limitations. Another approach is what Keybase does. Keybase also kind of tries to solve a kind of a similar problem with like large chats, and they basically gave up on forward secrecy. So their approach is every chat has a single symmetric key, right? If you get added to that chat, you get handed that same symmetric key. If there's 1,000 people, they all have the same symmetric key. It changes. There is some stuff where if someone leaves, they need to change the key. There are ways to kind of rotate the keys, but basically, ultimately, the point of the system is such that, you know, you can join a chat, you could scroll up, see all the history without having to download all these, you know, secondary keys. Their approach is very controversial in terms of the cryptographic kind of constraints that they're giving up on. It's hard to argue that their form of end-to-end encryption is as secure as everyone else's. They're pretty much the only platform that gave up on forward secrecy. Everyone else uses double ratchet. It's kind of the standard. So I usually don't get that deep into this stuff, but
no, this is cool.
to really deeply understand why backup is as broken as it is for end-to-end encryption today, you really kind of have to understand it from all these angles. And the important thing to mention beyond this is backup is the easy part. So I talked about like search, I talked about ranking. Backup is by far the easiest problem to solve, right? Trying to build like some homomorphic encryption way for like, you know, a ranker to be able to see ciphertext and then to still extract interesting features from that ciphertext that it can rank. It's like an unsolved problem. I don't imagine it will be solved anytime in the next 20 years. Fundamentally, like to do server stuff, you usually need access to plain text data. And that's kind of the crossroads we're at. Until we solve that problem, we're going to have simple chat apps on end-to-end encryption and nothing else.
Okay. But you're trying to go beyond that with the key server. So to be clear, neither Matrix or Keybase do the local key server thing, whatever that is. And I still, I still don't know what it is. And I also wanted to know if there's any desktop equivalent, because it seems like this is a mobile focused solution. So I was wondering if there's a desktop analogy that we can look at as currently functioning.
So I wouldn't say it's a mobile focused solution. So what's a key server? A key server is your own personal data operating system, your own personal kind of like private data cloud. Today, the world we live in, you have a bunch of accounts. You have an account with Facebook, you have an account with Slack, you have an account with Google. They all maintain these like walled gardens where your data is stored, right? And they kind of have control over data. You know, maybe they'll say you have some control, whatever. Ultimately, like you kind of defer to them to kind of manage your digital life. The key server kind of flips that around. In the key server model, your data is on your device. It's controlled by you, and you authorize Facebook, Google, et cetera, to use your key server and to, either store some data on there, or, to enable you to communicate with, maybe it's a social app so you can like chat with your friends, but all of that stuff, you allow them kind of to do that. And crucially, the key server controls where that code runs, right? So you can't, as an app developer, you can't actually have a standalone app, an iOS app with the setup as it is, because that would mean that you could take that data and exfiltrate it, send it to some logging service, some analytics service. So it's basically this whole like closed platform that controls your data and how it works. And the goal is ultimately to take the cloud and actually to replace it with a federated network of key servers, right? These key servers kind of talk to each other. So a couple crucial things to understand about a key server. First of all, what it's not. It's not a database. And this is important to understand. So a lot of people assume, okay, so this thing has like all of your data, right? It doesn't need to. It can just have your keys. The important thing is, right, that it has your keys, because you can take whatever data you want and you can encrypt that data with your keys and put it out somewhere else in the cloud. You can store it in some IPFS or whatever distributed. It doesn't even have to be distributed, right? The important thing is that this is just a cache, basically. Like, you ask it to do operations for you, it pulls down the information it needs and does that stuff and sends the response back, right? So we're trying to replace not the database layer, but we're trying to replace the cloud code, which is, I guess, to use parse terminology, if you remember parse, but like this idea of code that runs in the cloud, server layer code. That's what we're ultimately trying to replace. And we're trying to take that and move it to an environment that is controlled by the user. So another thing that, can be confusing is like, where does this thing run, right? So another thing that this is not, a key server is not encryption as a service. And what I mean by that is, we are not offering a service to run this key server for you. We can't do that, because crucially the key server needs access to your plain text data. So if we're running your key server for you, we have your plain text data, right? So we don't do that. And it's up to the user to figure out where they want to run their key server. As a default, we offer kind of initially when we launch, we're going to have two ways to do that. Way number one is to take a spare laptop, some laptop that you're not using, plug it into a wall socket, keep it on 24/7, and that becomes your key server, right? Option number two is to deploy something to the cloud. And we're kind of borrowing Google Outline VPN's approach, where Google Outline VPN lets you download this like manager thing to your laptop, and then it kind of walks you through the process of deploying a VPN to the cloud. And you can deploy it to AWS, to Google Cloud, and even to DigitalOcean. So we'll kind of have a similar model where you can kind of deploy to whatever account you want. Obviously, Amazon will have access to your data. Whether that matters to you, I think is kind of depends on the person. I'll say this, like, it's not Amazon or Google's business model to be reading your data. I'm pretty sure that they tell you that they don't read your data. And I think only in the case of like a government order would that become relevant. And so I'll say this, we're not trying to build like this like super like, we're trying to build a world with privacy by default. That's kind of what we're going for, right? And I think having your own kind of platform out in Amazon or in Google, like, it is privacy by default. It's a system where your data isn't being harvested, where your data isn't being monitored at all times. It's not quite the same as maybe what a spy would want or like a criminal would want or whatever else. And maybe for those users, they probably want to keep using Signal, or maybe they'll have a key server on a laptop at home. But what we're trying to do is build something for the average user to kind of get away from this world where you're just being tracked all the time.
Yeah. A couple questions. So when you say things like it will replace Dropbox, Gmail, Facebook, and so on.
Yeah.
So something like the how much, so as a, like, let's say I want to start the next Dropbox, I want to start the next Facebook.
Yeah.
And I want to build it with the premise of, like, let's just say the key servers are a thing, and I want to interact with all these. How much control do I have on changing the schema? Because like I think that's ultimately what I want, right? Like, if I can only get what the user gives me, then my pace of development is very slow. Does that make sense? Like,
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, so in terms of like, a typical app, when you're developing a typical app, you have access to all this
the whole
stuff.
thing.
Like, yeah, you do. Yeah. With this model, you don't, right? And so there's a couple kind of ways around that. One thing that you could do is, as an app developer, you could say, okay, in order to use my app, you have to friend me on Comm. So you have to actually friend my like corporate account, and that will allow Comm to actually say, okay, we can send data to this, because we limit who you can communicate with based on your social graph, right? So you could imagine a world where basically most apps, because the app developer just like needs some logging data to be able to like move forward, will ask you to authorize the app to actually send data out, right? And that's a trust relationship that you have to have between the app developer and the user. What we want to do is to make that explicit, right? And I also think that, you know, depending on the application, right? So something like Dropbox, I'll say, you know, it doesn't have to be too complicated. Like it's ultimately like this like file storage thing. And I think ideally, if I was picking between an app that was kind of maybe was app development kind of like finished mostly like, you know, several years back, and they just had something that works and they don't need to constantly be like getting all my data, I'd probably prefer that to an app that's maybe being like constantly evolved, but like has this like kind of leak in there, right? But probably depends on the app, right? So if you imagine maybe like a social app, I probably would make that trade-off in a different direction, given that, you know, it's harder to iterate on a social app like that. So it probably depends on the application, what kind of data you're putting on the application, all this kind of stuff. But the important thing is the user should be aware of it and the user should have control.
Yeah. So, but to be clear, the vision is that other people will build all these apps on top of Comm rather than Comm building all these things, right?
Yeah,
Um,
so we don't believe we can launch this as a platform. So, you know, if we just throw this thing out there and just say, hey, write apps for it, it's kind of a hard sell, because we don't have users, and, you know, users want to see apps.
yeah.
So we're starting by actually kind of building out what we think is like a killer app, and that's sort of this like Discord competitor. And the thinking there is, you know, Discord, you know, it's been so successful, and it's testament to this desire for private chat communities, right? But Discord has built a product for gamers, right? And it's really good for gamers. And what gamers need is like real time, in the moment, kind of real time chat, right? But that's not what everyone needs. And you have so many communities, and I have so many communities on Discord now that need something different. I have, you know, all these blockchain communities, all these like GitHub developer communities that probably need something that's more structured, that's more asynchronous, right? It's more collaborative. And so the way I look at it is Discord is bound to get unbundled. Like there's no way in like 5 years that we don't have like 10 Discords, right? And we're starting by basically building the anti-Discord. So Discord exists. We're trying to take the opposite kind of angle, build something that's very complementary to Discord. And so I think there's a real need in the market for this. And I think kind of the end-to-end encryption is a huge plus, especially given we're targeting these initial kind of like blockchain developer GitHub nerds. And the hope is that these are also going to be the first people to actually build apps in our platform, right? But yeah, I mean, your point is correct. Like we ultimately, this is meant to be a platform. And when we get there, like the hope is that we'll have users building apps on our platform rather than us being this like singular app developer.
No, that's fantastic. And I often reflect on how a lot of times people who want to build platforms end up building product first, and sometimes the product just takes off way more than the platform.
Yeah.
Or the other approach, right? Like then it just proves the viability of the platform, and more people will come out and build on the platform, which is great for you.
Yeah.
It does split your attention a little bit, but whatever.
Yeah.
You're pretty committed to this. How
Yeah.
much have you built already?
So I don't know, probably not too much. So we have an app, and that app is actually, you know, pretty mature. Given that I've been working on it for a long time. So we have an iOS app, an Android app, a website, but all this key server stuff I'm talking about really has not been built out. We're just getting started on that stuff. So I mean, this company really got started in January. We have like one employee besides me, so really not much of it has been built.
Gotcha. Can I see? Because I don't think I saw it. You sent me. So all I have is this Notion thing.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't.
yeah. Do you
I don't
want to
think I
see the?
saw the. Yeah, I don't think I saw
Yeah, yeah,
any
yeah.
site or app or anything. Okay, so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all on GitHub.
I'll share my screen just in case anyone is watching.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
never
yeah.
know. This is cool. I always like to star things for people.
Oh
So
yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
okay.
Yeah, so this is as it is. It's mostly like just the team collaborating on this thing. So it's not like yeah, we tried using that a while back. We have not updated
Okay.
that since
It
2020.
comes and goes.
Yeah, sorry.
I find it very useful if you commit to it. But then sometimes
Mhm.
stuff happens. Okay,
Yeah, we've
mainnet.
been using kind of like Notion mostly for that kind of like coordination stuff.
All right. So basically, not much to show like publicly, but you're there's just active development going on.
Yeah. I mean, so you can see the SquadCal app now, but that's kind of what currently what this currently builds to. So yeah, it's squadcal.org. There it is. But this is like, yeah, this design this is from like 2018. You can see even the Android still has the doesn't have the, what's it called, full screen device. It kind of looks a little old, but basically, yeah. I mean, so we have this app SquadCal, and we're continuing to release the thing as SquadCal because we don't want to use the name Comm until we've actually built out the end-to-end encryption layer. We want to be able
Yeah.
to tell users, right, that this is like truly private, and so we don't want to kind of besmirch the brand with like fake end-to-end encryption. So we're basically continuing to use the SquadCal name until we get to a point where we have the end-to-end encryption figured out. But the repo is under the name Comm now.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I mean, look, like, don't be embarrassed about it. Like, this is what early stage is.
Yeah, totally.
You should be shipping stuff you're embarrassed by. But like, what's like the game plan for like the next the near term? Because it really seems like this is going to hinge on I guess this getting adoption within the communities that you want to adopt. I will say that I raised my eyebrow when you said that you think Discord will be unbundled, because I think Discord has a huge network effect. I don't know how to overcome it. I'm invested in Circle, and we're trying to bridge people from Discord to Circle, and it just seems like Discord is just way more active anyway, just because people are already in it. And so starting a new app is difficult, but then I think I said this to you in my email, like, starting a new app is difficult, but if you pull it off, then that's a hugely defensible mode.
Yeah. I mean, no, you're super right. I mean, in terms of like putting our investor hats on, I'd say like this is the kind of thing that's like much less likely to hit than most startups. But if it does hit, it's like a huge thing, right? And I'll say this, I have deep confidence in the kind of two kind of principles. The first is that the world's going towards privacy, that people are increasingly aware of their digital footprint, increasingly desire to have control over their own privacy and their own data. And that, I think the world is moving towards like a world where we have privacy by default. And number two thing that I have high degree of confidence on is that the only way we can scale end-to-end encryption, the only way we can get to a world with privacy by default is with something like Keyservers. People have to have their own kind of server, right? And so I hold these two things kind of near and dear. Everything else, like this Discord idea, is just kind of an attempt. It's just like something we're trying out. And if it doesn't work, we'll try to pivot and try to find something else. In terms of like why I'm optimistic about it, I'll say, there's a whole thing I gave, the whole spiel I gave you, where I look at this as NC Discord kind of like being hacked into a lot of use cases that it really just wasn't built for. And I think in particular, the communities I've been talking about, these like blockchain developers and these GitHub people, they're obsessed with this kind of vision of decentralized community. Like they're sort of already in our cult of like, having control of their data, rather than deferring that to some corporation, right? So I think there's a huge appeal there. And I'm hoping those two things will work together. The other side of it is, we consider kind of three other angles of how to build this thing. And they have some limitations that this Discord approach doesn't. One of the biggest advantages of the Discord approach is that only admins need to set up a key server, right? Because setting up a key server, it's like a pretty high friction process. I talked about it earlier. You either have a spare laptop or you deploy something to the cloud, and maybe your super nerd is going to be down to do that initially, but like the average user is like, I just want to install an app, and so with this kind of Discord approach, only the admin needs to do it, and the average user just sets it up on their phone, just like any other kind of app. There's one other thing. Oh yeah, the social layer. So basically, another big advantage of this kind of Discord approach, as opposed to kind of some of the other approaches we've talked about. So ultimately, end-to-end encryption, it's a social thing. It's about enabling two users to be able to communicate with each other without having some intermediary have access to that data, right? So in order for us to be able to do that, to be able to guarantee to a user that any app that they install on our platform is end-to-end encrypted, for us to make that guarantee, we need to control all aspects of that app, and we have to control where it runs, and we can't let the app developer have access to the internet, right? And that means that we have to provide the social layer. And for us to be able to do that, we need to bootstrap a social graph. And so it's another kind of big advantage of this Discord approach that a lot of the other approaches just like don't have. But yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Like the most likely reason this thing fails is we fail to get traction with our app. Yeah,
it's cool. Yeah, I mean, they are this. I think I love the ambition. I love the mission. and you're totally right to focus in on I guess your words, the cult of people who really want to control the data and have the technical competency to set this thing up, because I think people want privacy first, but they every time you trade off UX,
Yeah.
you know, that's a large chunk of the population you just shut off. So it's a challenging thing. What what can I you reached out to me talking about
Yeah.
introductions. I'm probably not going to invest at this stage because I
Yeah.
don't really understand this as well as I should. But I mean, I'm really impressed by
Totally.
your storytelling and your background. And I mean, I think this is it's one of those things where, like, if it goes well, it goes really, really well.
Yeah.
And I'm always open to ideas like that. But who can I introduce you to? Like, what kind of help are you looking for?
Yeah. So the number one thing I'm trying to figure out right now is hiring. So, we have me, we have one employee, but he's straight out of college. And we have like a team in Poland. But like really I need to find kind of two personas. One is like a kind of CTO character, sort of like this 10x engineer. He kind of replaced me. Right now I'm doing all this code review. Like right
Yeah.
before this call, I was doing code review, and I don't have time to do all this stuff. And so I need to find someone who can kind of build out the first version of all this key server tech and kind of own that. And then the other kind of side, I need to find somebody who's like a design product guru, somebody who can kind of like own this product definition. Because I have some experience with product. I've spent my life working on social products, but in terms of like design, I'm like,
Yeah.
I can kind of, I'm not good at designing things super well. So I need somebody who can kind of partner with me on that, and also kind of a lot of other hats that need to be worn, stuff like kind of community manager, UX researcher. So the number one way you could help me is if you know anybody who could be a good fit for either of these roles, or if no one comes to mind, if you know people who might know people. So second order. So
Yeah.
whoever you could think of who might know somebody.
And have you applied to any of the accelerators like the YCs of the world? But there can be more than that. I think
Yeah.
you're in
So
New York, right? So Techstars is also an option.
yeah. So I spent a good amount of time considering some accelerators. I ultimately kind of decided against all of them right now. Couple kind of concerns. One, with this whole kind of like pandemic situation, like they're all trying to do like remote, and like I just don't know if I can really like get to that level of confidence about somebody just like from Zoom, and I don't know if that kind of the magic, the collaborative magic is gonna spark. And before you go into these, they always ask for like 7%, and 7%. I mean, I've already raised some money. I don't think my investors would be super excited about that, and I also myself would have to really justify that pretty strongly. So I'd say honestly, fundraising went quite well. I think it's testament to this is sort of like a moment for encryption right now, and I think there's
It
a
is.
lot of money floating around.
Yeah.
And I think I've gotten pretty good at the storytelling and the selling. But the part that I'm really struggling on is hiring, which is weird because I come from a technical background, but I've already tried all my friends and I've tried their friends, and
Yeah.
so whatever you can do to help there, I'd really appreciate.
Yeah. I'll keep it. I'll keep this in mind. I don't. No one comes to mind like right now.
Yeah.
Um, I I have. I mean, we're in a, yeah. I work at Temporal, and we're in the process of trying to hire a design lead ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it's hard.
but this is a very different opportunity, and we can both coexist. And I'll just make sure to route people to you when their sort of profile matches up. I was also going to suggest, I didn't know you're this far advanced in the fundraising, because I was going to suggest talking to people like Brian Acton or Mike Krieger to invest, because they're pretty active angels.
I would love to talk to either of those people. Yeah, literally both those people are people that I would love to get connected to and haven't been able to find like an
Oh
angle.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So if you
So
happen
Mike, yeah, Mike is a co-investor in Superbase. So what I should do is I should introduce you to. This is going to be because I'm 2 degrees separation from him. So I'll introduce you to Paul Copplestone, who's the CEO of Superbase, who Mike invested in. And so if he can probably get you that warm intro. Mike seems like he's just investing in everything. So I think he'll at least take a call from you, just because of your background, and this is something that he's interested in. Brian Acton, I have zero connections to. I just think that he's very interested in something.
Yeah, exactly. No, Brian Acton obviously makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so yeah, if I could find anybody from kind of that like WhatsApp team, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
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 Also,
Okay. Cool.
Moxie Marlinspike, if you know anyone who knows Moxie.
Moxie. I don't know Moxie.
Oh, sorry, this the founder of Signal.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Um, see, like this is how far out of depth I am. Like, I'm not super close. I know it's a thing, and I know some people tangentially. But cool. No one comes to mind. I don't want to overpromise
Yeah, no,
what I
totally.
can do, but I thought this was very compelling, and I thought at least the least I can do is have your story straight. So when I tell it to people, at least get to help you pitch these things, and hopefully send people your way. I think you're working on really cool stuff. I mean, I'm a little bit jealous because because you have the space to experiment, and you're passionate about this, and even if this immediate thing doesn't work out, you'll find something else that clicks. So this is pretty cool.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate kind of the vote of confidence.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I will stop recording. I feel like that was a natural endpoint. Is